Our water year has ended, new one beginning, and a look at the new drought monitor. I'm ABC10 Chief Meteorologist Monica Woods, breaking down the numbers, kind of seeing where things stand right now. In terms of what we saw over the course of the last water year, this year numbers not too bad, especially along the coast. Big numbers there. Interior California, not quite as beneficial in terms of our total precipitation, particularly through extreme northern California. Redding and Sacramento both below average. South Lake Tahoe about 6 inches below average. And then for Southern California, Palm Springs about 1.5 inches roughly below what we normally see. But again, along the coast, big numbers there all the way from Eureka through Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, and even San Diego about 2.5 inches above normal. Looking at our water year rankings, we're going to rank this as the 50th wettest on record throughout the state. As we break it down into areas throughout California, you can see along the coast, 24th wettest water year on record, 35th for Southern California, much drier across portions of southeastern California. And you're going to see indications of that popping up on the drought monitor, a little more so than, say, through extreme northern California. But overall, a pretty good picture, considering that last year was a big year for us as well. Bringing down the snow water equivalent numbers. Now, this is just as of April 1st. That's about the point that we see our maximum snowpack, and then we'll start the snow melt after that once we start picking up some of the warmth building in for the seasonal change. For the Northern Sierra and Trinity, our average came in at 123%. Central Sierra, over 100% of average. And for the Southern Sierra, 100% of average. Now, if we were talking maybe 2 or 3 years ago, these would have been incredible numbers. However, we had such a huge record-setting year the year prior. I think a lot of folks were thinking, oh, this was a dry year. But no, the statewide average actually ended up at 111%. So again, 2 back-to-back years where we put a lot of water in our reservoirs. Let me break down building a water year in California, because it's a little bit different than a lot of other places where we get kind of the precipitation that comes in on and off throughout the entire year. It just doesn't happen in California like that. Instead, our fall rain starts up in October and November. So we're right about that time when we start seeing more systems come through the Pacific and have a chance of actually busting through what is a very stubborn ridge of high pressure over the western states in the months of usually June, July, August, and even into parts of September. By December, January, and February, we're going to pick up 50% of our annual precipitation. Again, that doesn't always happen that way, but that's typical. In fact, this past water year, we had a very late start. It really didn't start ramping up until mid-January, really picking up in February, March, and we even had our biggest snowpack come in the beginning of May. Now, that being said, it pretty much shut down after that. But our peak snowpack, as I just mentioned, typically happens at the end of March, and then we'll start that peak snow melt in April and May. That's why that April 1st number is kind of that marker to say, okay, this is pretty much what we're going to be putting into those reservoirs for the time frame when we have our water at its highest demand, that being April, May, June, July, August, and even into September, simply because we don't have anything falling from the sky. So we have to use what we've stored at that point. Heat also playing a factor in August and September, because that can lead to some evaporation. So fuels around the foothills and the Sierra start to dry out, and that elevates that fire danger as well. And of course, then our water year ends end of September, and we start the whole cycle over again. Here's a look at our drought time series. And I mentioned a moment ago, if we were to see those sheer numbers for the Sierra, in previous years, we might have said, oh, this was such a great year. But given the fact that we had some pretty significant drought here over several years, that those numbers really kind of not as needed necessarily as what we normally have in terms of our snowpack. So here's a look at the 1980 numbers. We'll take it all the way back through there. And you can see we've had periods of some pretty wet back-to-back years. It'll be interesting to see what happens as we head into this water year, considering that 2023-24 was decent enough, and then 2022-23, a big water year for us. But this is what I was talking about. Look at this cycle right here from 2020 through 2022. Those were 3 years where we had really significant drought, and it was made even worse by the amount of heat and evaporation that we had to deal with as well. So if we got this water year at the end of that cycle, we would have been really rejoicing for how much relief we would have gotten. But given that the previous water year was so wet, well, this was just a bonus round for us. Here's a look at the drought monitor from week to week, and pretty much all things considered, not much of a change, honestly. A little bit more in the abnormally dry sector, but everything else is status quo. So our drought severity and coverage index is staying at 82. As we start to head towards the end of the month and November, that's when we start to see a few more changes with that drought monitor. But we're really not going to see many changes with our reservoir levels, and that's because we don't have any snowpack to melt off and put into these reservoirs. So where it stands for our capacity is pretty much going to stay there, if not go a little bit lower. Likely not too much lower. We're going to probably be drawing from some other resources for our water supply. But in terms of our averages, we're at about 95 to over 100% of average still. Trinity being a big winner here in this particular water year, because the previous one, despite the fact that it was a big water year for us, Trinity just didn't benefit from a lot of the rain coming in. Those storms tended to hit a little bit farther to the south. So nice to see some of those bigger reservoirs looking on the positive side of things in terms of our percent of average. As we travel our way southward here, New Melones, Don Pedro, and Millerton also above average right now, as is San Luis. Now, that is an off-stream pumped water reservoir, so they have a little bit more flexibility for water managers to either take water out or put water in San Luis Reservoir. Lots of upgrades, too, going on for our reservoir, so it'll be interesting over the next couple of years on how they're able to manage the water supply there. Here's a look at Shasta. This is our biggest reservoir, by the way, for California, our biggest water supplier. And the teal shaded kind of light blue area right here, this is our average. What I did is I put in the 2 past years, and that's why this past year was a total bonus round for us. Here's the capacity up here. The previous water year, we were nearing capacity. This year, we kind of neared that capacity a little bit earlier. We just didn't have that lingering rain and snow in our forecast, and we also melted things off pretty quickly. So we had some pretty quick runoff coming in for this past water year, but they were able to manage it again 2 back-to-back years. Really great here. We got a little bit below average for downtown Sacramento for this previous water year, but the year prior, 26.25. That was just huge numbers there. Before that, that's when we hit the drought numbers. 2020, 2021, we only had 7.74 inches of rain, not even 8 inches of rain for us there in that water year. And prior to that, we had some decent enough numbers. That 2016, 2017, it was the most that we'd ever seen. So we've kind of been up and down the mark here. Our last significant rain and snow, I mentioned this one, downtown Sacramento, May 4th. That's when we had roughly about 3/4 of an inch of rain. Central Sierra Snow Lab on May 5th had over 26 inches of snow, which, by the way, was the most snow they recorded for the season at the Central Sierra Snow Lab. That's what I mean about getting a late start. It really, that cycle just kind of didn't want to kick in at its usual time frame. Our average monthly rainfall, we usually get about an inch or so for October in downtown Sacramento. We are very slow to start this year. Instead, we're still dealing with record heat here as we've kicked off the new month and new water year. November starting to look a little bit more decent, and then again, December, January, and February, that's going to be the bulk of our precipitation that comes in. We sometimes have what we call Miracle March. That's when we get those late season big storms that come in, and they tend to be a bit more moisture laden because the atmosphere is a little bit warmer, holding more moisture, and we can get some really big systems in here in March. And then everything starts to wind down. By the time we get through July, August, and September, usually our average monthly rainfall is less than 1/10 of an inch. So the first fall rain that we see for downtown Sacramento, it usually is around October 7th. We're not seeing anything in the pipeline right now with at least 1/10 of an inch of rain. We happen to have an atmospheric river moving through the Pacific Northwest for our Friday and weekend forecast, but that just doesn't seem to want to bust through our high pressure ridge right now. Last day that we've had at least 1/10 of an inch of rain, so the latest that we've seen on the calendar when that precipitation actually starts to pick up, December 11th. And then the first day last year that we had at least 1/10 of an inch was on October 10th. So bottom line here, things are starting to change. It may take a little time to get there, but really once we start to open things up, the pipeline opens up and we start seeing the rain coming on in. And then, we just kind of wait and see how much we get for the year. Well, we've got more in-depth forecasts and explainers, as well as our weather specials and Emmy-winning weather special, The Future of California Water, on our ABC 10 Plus streaming app. Would invite you to go ahead and download that. It's super easy on Apple TV, Roku, Fire TV. It's free and it's always on. We've also got our newscasts on there. So if you're perhaps not home at the typical time of those live broadcasts, you can always rewatch it on your own timeline.